Hello! We are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are exploring the most powerful tool you own, your mind. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through the secrets of human psychology while helping you think directly in English.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. Most of us feel like we are fighting our own brains when we learn a language. Today, we want to talk about why your brain works the way it does and how understanding psychology can actually make you a faster, more confident English speaker.
That is a perfect way to start, Abel. And I want to say something to everyone listening right now. If you have ever felt frustrated with your English, if you have ever thought to yourself, why is this so hard? Please know that the problem is almost never your intelligence. It's not your memory. It's not even your vocabulary. Most of the time, the real problem is something much deeper. It's the way your brain has been programmed to protect you.
That's interesting, Anna. My brain protects me. I always thought my brain was just making my life difficult when I tried to speak English. Like, I know the words, I studied the grammar, but when I open my mouth, everything disappears. It's like my brain just goes blank.
You are describing something that millions of English learners experience every single day, Abel, and there's a beautiful psychological explanation for why that happens. So today, we are going to walk through 7 powerful ideas from human psychology. We'll explain each one slowly and clearly, and at every step, we'll connect it directly to your English learning journey. So let us begin with the very first, and perhaps the most fascinating concept of all. It's called the internal narrator.
The internal narrator. That sounds very mysterious. What does that mean exactly?
Okay, so close your eyes for a moment. Well, do not actually close your eyes because you're listening, but just imagine this. Right now, inside your head, there's a voice. It's talking. It never really stops. It's commenting on everything you do, everything you see, everything you feel. When you wake up in the morning, this voice might say something like, I am tired, I don't want to get up. When you look outside the window, it might say, oh, it's raining today. That inner voice, that constant mental commentary running inside your mind, is what psychologists call the internal narrator.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. My internal narrator is very busy. And I have to be honest, Anna, my internal narrator speaks in my native language, not in English. Even when I'm trying to learn English, everything inside my head is still in my first language.
And that's completely normal, Abel. In fact, that's the default setting for almost every language learner on the planet. Your brain learned your native language first. It used that language to build its entire understanding of the world. So naturally, when you think in your mother tongue. The challenge and also the incredible opportunity is to slowly, gradually, and gently redirect your internal narrator to start using English instead.
But how do you even do that? It feels almost impossible. Like, how do I change the language of my thoughts?
The secret is to start very, very small. You don't try to think complex philosophical thoughts in English on day one. That would be overwhelming. Instead, you start with the simplest, most ordinary moments of your day. For example, when you pick up your morning coffee, you say inside your head, this coffee is hot. When you put on your shoes, you think, these shoes are comfortable. When you look at the sky, you think, the sky is blue today. These are tiny thoughts, almost too simple, but what you're doing is extraordinarily powerful. You're slowly training your internal narrator to reach for English first before it reaches for your native language. Over time, with consistent practice, those simple thoughts become longer thoughts. The longer thoughts become conversations, and one day, almost without realizing it, you'll catch yourself dreaming in English.
Dreaming in English? Is that really possible?
It's absolutely possible, and it's one of the most exciting signs of real fluency. It means your subconscious mind, the part of your brain that works even while you sleep, has fully accepted English as a real, living language in your mind. But it all starts with those tiny, simple, daily narrations. This is the foundation, and it connects beautifully to our next topic.
Okay, I love that idea. But Anna, I want to be honest about another problem I have. Even when I try to speak English, I get this terrible feeling that everyone is watching me, like everyone is judging every single word I say. It makes me so nervous that I just freeze.
Abel, what you're describing has an actual name in psychology. It's called the spotlight effect, and it's one of the most common and most powerful psychological biases that human beings experience. Let me explain it clearly. The spotlight effect is our tendency, our natural human habit, to believe that other people are paying much more attention to us than they actually are. We feel like there's a giant spotlight shining directly on us at all times. We feel like every mistake we make is seen, judged, and remembered by everyone around us.
Yes, that's exactly how I feel. When I make a grammar mistake in English, I feel like the whole room notices, and I become embarrassed for the rest of the day.
I completely understand that feeling, and here's what makes it so fascinating from a psychological perspective. Researchers at Cornell University actually did a study on this exact phenomenon. They asked one group of students to walk into a room wearing a shirt with a very embarrassing picture on it. Before they entered the room, they were asked to guess how many people inside would notice and remember the shirt. The students wearing the embarrassing shirt guessed that about half of the people in the room would remember it. Do you want to know what the actual result was?
Yes, please tell me.
Only about 25% of the people in the room actually noticed the shirt. The real number was half of what the students predicted. This is the spotlight effect in action. Our brains consistently and dramatically overestimate how much other people are paying attention to us. And this applies so perfectly to language learning. When you make a grammar mistake, when you mispronounce a word in the middle of a sentence, you feel like the whole world noticed. But the truth, backed by real science, is that most people are far too focused on their own thoughts, their own worries, and their own internal narrators to spend much time judging yours.
That's actually very comforting, Anna. It makes me feel a little bit better. But knowing something in my head and actually feeling calm when I speak are two very different things. How do I close that gap?
That's one of the most intelligent questions you can ask about psychology and language learning, Abel, and the answer brings us to our third powerful concept today. It's about the brain structure called the basal ganglia, and it's the key to understanding how habits are formed. I want to tell you something truly remarkable. Your brain is, at its core, a habit machine. It's always constantly looking for ways to automate your behavior. It doesn't like to work hard if it can avoid it. And the part of your brain most responsible for this automation is called the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia. That's a very scientific sounding word. What exactly does that do?
Think of it this way. When you first learned to tie your shoes as a small child, you had to think about every single step. You had to think about which lace goes over which, how to make the loop, how to pull it tight. It required real mental effort and concentration. But now, as an adult, you tie your shoes without thinking at all. You could probably do it in the dark or while having a conversation. The basal ganglia took that complex sequence of movements and compressed it into an automatic routine. It stored it deep in your brain so that your conscious mind never has to think about it again.
That makes sense. So, is speaking a language also a kind of habit?
Exactly. Fluency in any language is essentially a very complex, deeply practiced habit. When a native English speaker says the phrase, I am going to, they do not consciously think about the grammar. They do not stop and say, okay, I need the subject, then the auxiliary verb, then the main verb. Their basal ganglia handles all of that automatically in a fraction of a second. The goal for every English learner is to train their basal ganglia to do the same thing with English. And here's the important psychological insight. The basal ganglia responds to repetition and to routine. It does not care if you are tired, it does not care if you feel motivated or not. It only cares about consistency.
So if I practice thinking in English every single day, even for just a few minutes, my brain will eventually start to automate it?
Precisely. And research in behavioral psychology suggests that a new habit can begin to feel automatic after approximately 60 to 90 days of consistent daily practice. Now, that might sound like a long time, but consider this. If you spend just 10 minutes every morning narrating your thoughts in English, just 10 simple minutes of talking to your internal narrator in English, after 3 months, your brain will start doing it automatically, even when you are not trying. The habit will be built into your neural pathways. Thinking in English will start to feel natural because your basal ganglia will have made it your brain's default setting.
That gives me real hope, Anna. But I want to talk about something else that holds me back. I have been studying English for years, and sometimes I still say to myself, I cannot speak English. Like, that thought just appears in my head and I start to believe it. Why do I do that to myself?
What you are describing is one of the most profound and well-studied areas of modern psychology. It connects to the work of a Stanford University psychologist named Carol Dweck, and her concept is called the growth mindset. But before I explain the solution, let me explain the problem. Your brain has what psychologists call a fixed mindset about certain skills. A fixed mindset is the deep, subconscious belief that your abilities are permanent and unchangeable, that you are either good at something or you are not, that intelligence and skill are things you are born with, not things you build.
I think I definitely have that about English sometimes. I hear someone speaking English so perfectly, and I think they must have a special gift. I will never be like that.
And that thought, I will never be like that, is your brain's way of keeping you safe. Here is the psychological mechanism behind it. Your brain has a built-in system for avoiding threats. In prehistoric times, this system protected early humans from physical danger. If something seemed risky, the brain sent a signal to stay away. Today, that same system responds to psychological threats, things like embarrassment, failure, and judgment from others. When you think about speaking English in public, your brain perceives it as a threat, and it sends you a very convincing message. Do not try. You might fail. It is safer to just say you cannot do it.
So my brain is literally lying to me when it says I cannot speak English?
Yes, Abel, that's exactly right. It's not a malicious lie. Your brain genuinely believes it is protecting you, but it is, at its core, an inaccurate narrative. Carol Dweck's research showed something extraordinary. When people were taught to believe that their abilities could grow and improve through effort and practice, their actual performance in learning tasks improved dramatically. The mindset shift alone, just changing the belief about what is possible, changed the brain's behavior. The growth mindset says, I cannot speak English yet. That small word, yet, changes everything. It transforms a permanent limitation into a temporary condition. It tells your brain that this is a journey with a destination, not a wall with no door.
I really like that word, yet. I cannot speak English yet. I'm going to try to remember that. But Anna, I also struggle with staying motivated. Some days I feel so excited about English, other days I feel like it's impossible and I want to give up. Why is my motivation so inconsistent?
This is where neuroscience becomes incredibly useful for language learners. And this leads us to our fourth powerful concept today, which is about dopamine. You've probably heard the word dopamine before. Many people think of it simply as the happiness chemical, but it's more accurate to call it the motivation chemical. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, a chemical messenger in your brain, and its primary job is to make you feel the reward of taking action. It's what makes you feel good when you accomplish something.
So when I successfully have a conversation in English, I feel dopamine.
Yes, but here's the fascinating part. Big successes release dopamine, but your brain doesn't actually require big successes. Research has shown that the brain releases dopamine in response to any perceived progress, even very small progress. Psychologists call these small moments of achievement micro-wins, and they're enormously powerful tools for maintaining motivation over time.
Micro wins. Can you give me an example of what that looks like for an English learner?
Absolutely. Let's say you're having a conversation in English and you successfully use the word however in a sentence for the first time. That's a micro win. You should pause and acknowledge it internally. You should say to yourself, I did that. I used that word correctly. Or maybe you listened to an English podcast and you understood 90% of it without looking at subtitles. That's a micro win. Maybe you wrote 3 sentences in English in your journal before bed. That's a micro win. Each time you consciously recognize one of these small victories, your brain receives a small but real dose of dopamine, and dopamine teaches your brain to want to repeat the behavior that caused it.
So you're saying that if I celebrate my small achievements, my brain will actually want to keep practicing English?
Exactly. You are essentially training your brain's reward system to associate English practice with pleasure rather than pain. This is the psychological foundation of all long-term motivation. The mistake most learners make is that they only celebrate the big achievements. They only feel proud when they can have a perfect conversation or when they pass a major exam. But those big moments are rare. If you only reward yourself for rare achievements, your dopamine system stays mostly quiet and motivation fades. But if you train yourself to find and celebrate the small wins, the dopamine flows more regularly, and your brain genuinely begins to enjoy the process of learning.
That completely changes how I think about practice. But Anna, I want to go back to something you said earlier about speaking in public. Even when I feel good about my English privately, the moment I have to speak in front of other people, all of that confidence seems to disappear. It is like my English knowledge gets locked behind a door and I cannot find the key.
What you're describing is a deeply human psychological experience, Abel, and it relates to a concept called social validation. Human beings are, at the most fundamental level, social creatures. Our ancient ancestors lived in small groups and tribes. Being accepted by the group was not just emotionally important, it was literally a matter of survival. A person who was rejected by their tribe in prehistoric times would be alone and vulnerable. The brain learned over hundreds of thousands of years to treat social rejection as one of the most serious threats imaginable.
So when I am afraid to speak English in front of people, my brain thinks I'm in danger?
Precisely. Your brain cannot always tell the difference between the fear of being judged for a grammar mistake and the ancient fear of being rejected by the tribe. The emotional response is similar. Your heart rate increases, your palms may sweat, your mind goes blank. All of these are symptoms of your brain activating its threat response system. And this is why social anxiety around speaking a second language is so incredibly common and so powerful. It is not weakness, it is biology.
Understanding that makes me feel less alone about it, honestly. But what can I do about it? How do I rewire that response so that speaking English feels safe instead of scary?
One of the most effective tools that psychologists and language coaches recommend is the conscious use of positive affirmations, specifically affirmations spoken in English. Now, I know that the word affirmations sometimes makes people roll their eyes. It can sound like something from a self-help book that doesn't connect to reality, but there's real neuroscience behind why they work. When you repeatedly say a positive statement about yourself, especially in a language you're learning, you are doing several important things simultaneously.
What things?
First, you are practicing speaking English in a low-pressure, safe environment, your own voice, your own private space, no audience to judge you. Second, and this is the neuroscience part, the brain has a remarkable tendency to gradually accept and internalize statements that it hears repeatedly. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. The more you hear something, the more your brain begins to treat it as true. So when you say, every day, I am becoming a more confident English speaker, or I enjoy speaking English and my English is improving, your brain begins to slowly update its belief system. It starts to replace the old, fearful narrative with a new, more empowering one.
So the affirmations actually rewire the belief that speaking English is dangerous.
Over time, yes, they work in cooperation with the growth mindset we discussed earlier. They communicate to your subconscious mind that English is safe, that speaking is rewarding, and that you are capable. And when your subconscious believes those things, the threat response weakens, and speaking English in public becomes gradually, measurably less frightening. It won't happen overnight, but consistency is the key, just as it is with building any habit in the basal ganglia.
Anna, I want to ask about something very specific that happens to me. I'll be in the middle of an English lesson, or I'll be reading an article in English, and then life gets busy. I get distracted. And then the next day, that English lesson is somehow still on my mind, like I keep thinking about it, even though I didn't finish it. Is that normal?
Not only is it normal, Abel, it has a name. It's one of the most useful and most interesting discoveries in the history of psychology, and it's called the Zeigarnik effect. It was discovered by a Soviet psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik in the 1920s. The story of how she discovered it itself is a beautiful and memorable story. Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a cafe in Vienna, and she noticed something fascinating about the waiters working in the cafe. The waiters could remember with perfect accuracy every detail of the food orders that had not yet been delivered, which table wanted what, which customer had asked for extra something, but the moment an order was completed and delivered, the waiters forgot the details almost instantly.
That is a very interesting observation. So the brain remembers things that are unfinished.
Exactly. Zeigarnik went back to her laboratory and she tested this with controlled experiments. She asked participants to complete a series of tasks. She interrupted some participants in the middle of their tasks and allowed others to finish completely. Afterward, she asked everyone to recall the tasks. The results were clear and remarkable. People who were interrupted and did not finish the tasks remembered them almost twice as well as the people who completed them. The unfinished tasks created a kind of mental tension, almost like an open loop in the brain that kept pulling attention back to them.
So my brain keeps thinking about my unfinished English lesson because it has an open loop.
Precisely. And here's the beautiful and very practical lesson for English learners. You can use the Zeigarnik effect intentionally and strategically. Instead of always finishing your English study sessions at a natural stopping point, sometimes you should stop right in the middle of something interesting. Stop in the middle of an interesting story. Stop in the middle of a grammar explanation. Stop right before you find out the answer to a question. When you do this deliberately, you create an open loop in your brain. Your subconscious mind will continue to process that unfinished English content throughout the rest of your day, even when you're not consciously studying.
That is really a clever study technique. So the lesson I think I didn't finish is actually being processed in my brain all day long.
That is correct. Your brain is working on it in the background, like a computer running a program you cannot see on the screen. And when you return to that lesson the next day, your brain will feel a powerful pull toward it because it wants to close that open loop. That pull is motivation. It is curiosity. It is the Zeigarnik effect working for you instead of against you. English teachers and content creators who understand this principle often use it deliberately. They leave episodes on exciting cliffhangers, they start explanations and save the best part for next time, and they ask questions before giving answers. All of these techniques trigger that open loop feeling in the brain.
Anna, I feel like every single thing we have talked about today is connecting together into one big picture. The internal narrator, the spotlight effect, the basal ganglia and habits, the growth mindset, dopamine and micro-wins, social validation and affirmations, and now this Zeigarnik effect. These are not just interesting facts about psychology, they all seem to be pointing to the same deeper truth about learning English.
You have noticed something very important, Abel, and I'm glad you brought that together. Because you're right, all of these psychological principles are connected by one central idea. Your English fluency is not primarily a language problem, it's a brain management problem. The vocabulary is learnable, the grammar is learnable, but if your internal narrator is fighting you in your native language, if the spotlight effect is making you afraid of every mistake, if your fixed mindset has convinced you that fluency is impossible, if your dopamine system has no reason to stay motivated, if your social threat response is shutting you down in public, if you have no strategy to use the brain's habit systems or its love of open loops, then all the vocabulary and grammar in the world will not be enough to make you a confident, fluent English speaker.
So understanding your own psychology is the real foundation of language learning.
It is the foundation of all learning, actually. And this is why the most successful English learners are not always the ones with the best textbooks or the most expensive courses. They are the ones who understand their own minds well enough to work with their brains instead of against them. They redirect their internal narrator gently and consistently. They remind themselves of the spotlight effect when fear of judgment appears. They use repetition and routine to build automatic English thinking through the basal ganglia. They speak to themselves with a growth mindset, adding that powerful word yet to every limitation. They hunt for micro wins every single day to keep their dopamine flowing. They use English affirmations to slowly rewire their social fear response. And they use the Zeigarnik effect to keep their English lessons alive in their minds between study sessions.
I feel like I have genuinely learned something today that goes beyond English. I have learned something about myself, about how my brain works, and about why I sometimes feel stuck. And honestly, I feel more motivated right now than I have felt in a long time. Not because someone told me to study harder, but because now I actually understand the machine I'm working with.
That is the most powerful shift a learner can make, Abel. And that is the heart of everything we explored today. When you understand the psychology of your own mind, you stop seeing your brain as your obstacle and you start seeing it as your greatest ally. Every concept we discussed, from the quiet voice of your internal narrator to the fascinating memory trick of the Zeigarnik effect, is a tool that already exists inside you, waiting to be used with intention and with knowledge.
And the most exciting part is that none of these tools require expensive equipment, a perfect accent, or years of formal education. They just require awareness, consistency, and the courage to keep going even when the brain sends its old, fearful signals.
Beautifully said, Abel. To everyone listening today, remember this above all else. Mastering your own psychology is not a detour on the road to English fluency. It is the road itself. And every step you take with awareness and self-compassion is a step that your brain, your remarkable, adaptable, endlessly capable brain, will remember.